It is Locked On Jazz for the 7th of June. A little gratitude toward Quin Snyder and his tenure with the Utah Jazz. Takeaways from the press conference with Ainge, Ryan Smith, and Quin Snyder will take our time. And BetOnline has their list of coaching favorites for your Utah Jazz. It's all coming up next on today's edition of Locked On Jazz. Pow!
You are Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
How are you? I'm David Locke, radio voice of the Utah Jazz, Jazz NBA insider. This is Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz, giving you insight, expertise, geeky numbers, and hopefully making it way better to be a Jazz fan each and every day. Thanks very much for making Locked On Jazz your first listen of the day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube, the live audience on YouTube for you, the podcast audience forever your convenience. The comment section always rolling. Please leave us 5 stars or a thumbs up, whatever it might be. As I went back and thought about yesterday's show after the press conference, my thought a little bit was that maybe we didn't, in yesterday's show, kind of in the midst of everything, give Quin Snyder maybe enough of the gratitude or recognition or take enough time to kind of remember where we were when he took over, what he took over, and what he did. I made kind of one snide comment yesterday in the show, and I don't think that was probably appropriate to understand. I mean, I think we really have to have a moment here as clear. You know, it's come to an end. The shock's over. This is the reality. I think, at least I feel, it's appropriate to take a last moment to really give some gratitude to Quin Snyder for what he did. He took over a franchise that really was not good, right? Like we were in the worst spot we've been in a while. The Jerry Sloan sudden retirement had kind of really rocked us. Dennis Lindsay had started a rebuild process and then hired Quin Snyder as the head coach, and it was a rudderless, cultureless team after being 25 and 57. And Dennis Lindsay had been with us for about a year, but he hadn't really put a stamp on anything yet. And then Quin came and put the stamp on the team and who they and where they are and who they are, and was able to, I think in that's the first thing, is that he led us in a direction out of where the franchise was and put a stamp on what the franchise was going to become. And I think that's the first thing. And that puts us in a great position to have success as a franchise today with whoever the next head coach is going to be for the Utah Jazz, because this person now has the opportunity to take over and a team that has had a culture and a progress and done some of those kind of things. So I think that's the first one. It's really a memory of where the franchise was. I mean, if you go back and look at that roster, and the snide comment I made the other day is we started Dante Exum simply because he wasn't Trey Burke. That's kind of where it was at that point. We drafted Trey Burke, and it just wasn't working, and we weren't going anywhere. Gordon Hayward then emerges into a heck of a player. He develops Rudy Gobert, and 3 years later, they're 51-31, and they win the first round of the playoff series over the LA Clippers. And then, we're really struck with a moment there where, stunningly, Gordon Hayward leaves. And the franchise is on, it feels like it is over. And Rodney Hood is going to be our guy. And he rebuilds this thing around Rudy and Donovan and builds it up. And again, they win 48 games and they win another playoff series. And now you've got this kind of, Joe Ingles, Rudy Gobert. You're figuring out how to play with two bigs. There wasn't another coach in the league at that point that had a roster that had two big guys that couldn't dribble, couldn't pass, and couldn't shoot. Like that's not where the league was heading at that point. We were starting Derek Favors and Rudy Gobert, and had two guys that couldn't dribble, couldn't pass, couldn't shoot. And then, like when you go back over the years, the stretch fours were Joe Johnson, Thabo Sefolosha, Jonas Jerebko, finding a way to make this work and just maximizing the most out of every player that this team had. It gets stonewalled again, with Houston, in the matchup with Houston on a year in which the Jazz were the number one defensive team in all of the NBA in 18-19. And then by the time we hit the 21-22 season, they've been completely rebuilt. And the same coach has taken the Jazz to be the number one defense in entirely the NBA. I mean, that's a pretty incredible accomplishment, and it's why Quin will get whatever job he wants. There just aren't a lot of coaches who've turned you into the number one offense and the number one defense in the NBA. And so we were given out of a franchise that kind of, no offense to, like, Dennis hadn't put his stamp on anything yet in that first year. We were pretty rudderless. We were basically, tanking for Dante Exum. And then our rudder was Quin Snyder for 8 years. This guy gave us high quality basketball, gave us a vision, gave us a hope, played Jazz basketball, which he talked about was this ball movement and this obvious unselfishness that we really saw until this last year, when that just didn't happen. And that's probably where, Quin consistently has said, like, you know what, like they need a new voice. I mean, no one asked who stopped listening and when they stopped and why they need a new voice. But it's clear that Quin just felt he didn't have the mechanism by which to be able to get across what he wanted to with this group any longer as it's constructed right now, or maybe the uncertainty of how it's going to be constructed was enough to this, or maybe it's just time, right? Like, I think that the concept there is fine. But staying on the theme of like what this guy gave us, is he gave Jazz basketball an importance. We were on Christmas Day on 2 different occasions. We were in the playoffs for 6 straight years. We won, I think, the third most amount of games in the last 6 years. At one point, we'd won the most. Only Milwaukee at that point had won more games than us. You can, if you'd like to, you're welcome to zero in on the difficulties of this team in the playoffs. That's fine. But on the other end, I think you can really look at this as an incredible 8-year run, particularly the last 6, of just awesome entertainment, a viable team, a team that was relevant in the NBA, that had all-star players, had multitude of all-star players, 4 different ones that, Mike Conley finally makes an all-star team. Donovan becomes an all-star. Rudy, Gordon Hayward, and a franchise that, I think it was relevant. There's a lot of franchises that exist that aren't relevant. And that, to me, is the gratitude. Like, the thank you for 8 years of leadership, 6 years of incredible basketball, really gives us where we are today, and a franchise that is in a terrific position to move forward because of what, Quin did with this franchise. So I thought, yesterday was very kind of pragmatic, and Quin resigns, and, what he said in his statement and what's next. And I just thought it was really important. We took a moment before we start breaking down every coach and every different thing around there, and take a second and just, wow, what a run. Thank you. Incredible. What a level of basketball. What an, played the game right. We are so proud of Jazz basketball. I mean, it's interesting to hear there's such kind of about last year's group and how they played, because it was such in contrast to what we felt so proud about as a fandom and as a group. In the way that the Jazz just didn't play that same way, right? The passes were gone. There were all sorts of things that just didn't have that same oomph to it that the Jazz had a year ago. So super interesting to kind of hear the different perspectives on it, and really very much appreciate kind of what Quin did. And then I think the other thing is he frankly made things interesting with his just incredible intellect. When people talk about Quin Snyder and they talk about smart. We're not talking normal smart here. We're talking a completely different level of smart than what this brain is on a totally different level, and it's intellectual both on and off the court. And that's he brought that. It was our unique essence of what we had was this guy Quin Snyder. And people, it's a kind of a cliche, oh, he's so smart. No, this is different. This is John Nack's beautiful mind. This is uniquely running at a speed that's unprecedented, running at with a thought process that's unprecedented, and is unique in of himself. And, probably at times is a curse as much as it is a blessing, if we really want to delve into it. But that's truly what we had with Quin Snyder. I had about 8 or 9 takeaways from yesterday's press conference, including the impact of the Millers being there. I think the impact, some interesting comments from Danny Ainge, as well as Quin Snyder, and the key comment of all from Ryan Smith. So we'll have that for you as we continue. Tuesday edition of Locked On Jazz is brought to you by our good friends at Murdoch Hyundai, located at 4646 South State Street, also located in Logan and in Linden. The Murdochs have been with Utah for over 80 years, and what are they doing? They're not, we've talked about it before, they're not charging you more than MSRP. Blake has said, I'm not going to be in a circumstance in which I am suddenly going to the grocery store, going to church, and seeing someone that we took an extra $5,000 from. We're just not going to do it as a family. It's nice. It's refreshing. It's who the Murdochs are. And the Hyundais are fantastic. I'm driving the Sonata right now, and it really is a neat car. Really, really drives fabulous. I was talking to my son about it today. We drove it for a little while. I was like, it's just great. Sedan. The Elantra is the North American car of the year. The Palisade is the beautiful, exquisite SUV, with the Santa Fe, which we own 2 of, the Tucson, and the Kona. They're all at Murdoch Hyundai. If you're going to stop by, please email me first at dlock09@gmail.com so we can give you the VIP treatment that you deserve as a Locked On listener. Today's show is also brought to you by Prize Picks. It is the daily fantasy made easy. Pick 5 players and over/under on their projections, and you can win up to 10 times on any entry. It's just you versus projected numbers. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that easy. Prize Picks is safe, and its award-winning app is on the App Store as well as Google Play. Prize Picks offers any prop you can think of, from points scored to rebounds, even steals. So go right now. It's not just the NBA. It's college basketball, college football, NFL, MLB, soccer, MMA, and more. For a limited time, Prize Picks has an exclusive no-brainer offer for our users. You get $50 for free if a player in your first Prize Picks entry scores a single point, but you must use the code NBA. That's right. This is an exclusive offer available to Locked On fans. Sign up today. Use the code NBA, $50 for free if a player in your first Prize Pick entry scores a single point. Thanks very much for making Locked On Jazz your first listen of the day. Your second listen of the day, make it be Locked On NBA Big Board. All right. So here were my takeaways. The first one, incredible classiness from the Miller family. For the Miller family to come to this press conference, Gail, Kip was there, Steve was there, really, and then Steve Starks was there, really just shows you, we've always known how great a family that is and how fabulous Gail is as a human. But it just was a reminder. Like, I thought that was and there was the one time Quin got really choked up in the press conference was when he looked over to them. And it was to me, it was a stark reminder that 8 years ago, when Quin Snyder took the job as head coach of the Utah Jazz, it was actually a risk. It was a risk to hire Quin Snyder. Now, Quin Snyder will be one of the few coaches in NBA history who will have his choice of where he wants to go. Coaches get fired. Quin Snyder ain't get fired. That was abundantly clear when Danny Ainge said we desperately wanted to keep Quin Snyder. And he even took a little shot that he expected Quin to coach this year. I don't know if it was a shot, but kind of a fun little jab that he expected to see him out there. I don't know if that'll be the case, but I'm kind of hearing otherwise, that Quin even said, like, I'll be there for Halloween to his kids. It does not sound like Quin's going to coach in this upcoming season, but then the amount of jobs that will open to get Quin Snyder is somewhat endless. So the first one to me was the real takeaway, was to Quin taking that moment. He looked over at the Millers. There was some real emotion to it. Quin, is incredibly introspective and does, his self-analysis, which I think is why he stepped down and why he said there's time, for another voice. But I think he actually did, like at that moment, remember that he was a risk at that point, that there had been Missouri, he'd been around, Dennis was taking a risk on him, he was taking, they took a risk, and he answered that risk 10 times over. But it was still at that time. I thought Quin, when I asked him about his footprint, and I thought it was interesting, he talked about building the practice facility. And what he really started to kind of talk about was the brand and the essence of what that practice facility meant to him. And this included like this incredible film room for the players, which was done in a motif that was specific to Quin. And Don Sterling, a former Jazz employee, worked with him as a music buff, and all the record albums, Derek Garduno did this with him, record albums around of jazz record albums, like the music and this feeling like, hey, we're going to have it's not like our basketball of jazz. Basketball is the equivalent to jazz music, and it's togetherness, and it's an orchestra, and it's movement. Like all these things to Quin were so important, these deep, intellectual, little brands, little messages, codes. When we read the book Culture Code on the show together, and we really looked into culture code, I mean, Quin was the master of it, his own language, his own script, his own codes, his own wording, these little cultural things. Everything around Quin was done intentionally and with a purpose and with a perception. There's nobody who's been more aware of people and building that than Quin Snyder. And so that was interesting to hear Quin talk about the building, the practice facility, and what he built there, the Ritz-Carlton-esque dining area for the players to have meals, the way the line, has incredible health and science stuff, and the way that he literally thought about how, well, if you parked your car here and you walked in this fashion, this was the first things you were going to see and how you were going to feel and all of those things. I mean, this was so important to him as a coach to build those kind of things. The other one was him talking about his own self-analysis and introspective. He's just so aware. He reads a room better than anyone I've ever been around. And understands a room and understands his place in the room and understands where things are going. And I think that's why he stepped away. That's why he just continually said, I couldn't find a path forward in the Gordon Monson article, and I couldn't, they need a new voice. That's Quin Snyder, the self-analysis, introspective person with that brain power we talked about earlier that's completely unprecedented, being able to recognize the room. I thought that was really eye-opening there. The other comments that jumped out was obviously Ainge making the comment he thought he would coach next year, and that Ainge said he desperately wanted him back, and that Ainge also saying, hey, I've stepped away as a coach and a GM, and this guy knows himself better than I'm going to know him. So respect to the decision that he was making there. But the talk of relationships. And, personally, I was very touched and fortunate to spend that time with Quin. I was trying to count the amount of dinners we had. It's crazy over the years. And he's a relationship person. And he builds those, and he connects, and he's a connector, and he's a fixer, and he's a helper. I heard Spence Checketts talking about some of this as well. He's a giver, he's a carer. That's very much who he was. Then the comment from Ryan Smith that I thought was really, really important. We're going to take our time. We're going to get this right. That there really is no value for the Jazz to have a coach by June 15th instead of July 15th. I don't know how long we can talk about it, but that's the truth of the matter. There's no real value about the Jazz having a coach on June 15th instead of July 15th. They're not going to make a decision on the draft pick. They're not, which we don't have. We may have one, for all you know, Quin's going to get traded between now and then. My understanding is that if Quin were to coach this year, somebody would have to give the Jazz compensation. So, Quin's not coaching, but let's see what happens. I still think I don't think he's coaching this year from what I'm hearing, but the guy's a coach. And I thought, I thought that Danny Ainge, I asked him about the through line of Doc Rivers and Brad Stevens and what that through line was. And I'm looking forward to an opportunity to talk to Danny about this more. I thought it was really humble of Danny to make the comment that, hey, the first time I'd played against Doc, I was around the game. I'd done TV. I was even closer to Doc, and I knew what I was getting. And then when Boston, I was scouting everywhere and out and about all the time. And that's when he saw Brad Stevens. He said, this one's going to be different. And it's got to be more thorough than my past coaching searches because I'm not as connected as I was then or doing the things that are walking me into coaches. So I thought that was a really interesting comment from Danny in regards to kind of where they are in this process and why they could take some time in it. And the final takeaway, at least for me, was a pretty emotional moment. It was when Quin walked out and realized he was never representing the Utah Jazz again. And this guy really, for 8 years, has been the face, the brand, the uniqueness that is the Utah Jazz. And that was stark to me. Like, you know, I've called 8 years of games for Quin Snyder. I was trying to figure it out how many coaches show. We didn't do them this year. So we had 7 years of 80, 90 coaches shows. So 7 years times 90 is at 630 some odd coaches shows we did together. 3 questions each. Like I asked him 1,800 questions over the years. Like probably. It's kind of crazy. And so to see him leave, and it was always fun to have Quin Snyder as part of your group. You know, he'd hold a press conference and you could watch the other people walk out like, wow. And you're like, well, we get that every night from him. It was a really nice thing. And to see him walk out and realize he was never representing the Jazz organization again, was surprising to me. Bet Online has given odds to the Jazz coaches. We'll have that for you as we continue next on Locked On Jazz. Today's show is brought to you by Built Bar. Right now, you get free Built Boost with any bar purchase. Their Immunity Boost, which is about a $15 purchase. Granola bars, coconut or chocolate peanut butter, white chocolate berry are out, and the Grasshopper Cookie is here. And you get 15% off a sale on the Grasshopper Cookie. I don't know why Grasshopper Cookie is on sale. They are so good. Brownie batter puffs still available. Coconut, marshmallow, churros, banana cream pie, all available for you. Plus the regular flavors, coconut, mint brownie, peanut butter brownie, raspberry, coconut almond, salted caramel. 130 calories, 17 grams of protein, and 4 grams of sugar on your normal Built Bar. Incredible macros, great tasting. It's a protein bar that tastes like a candy bar. Use the promo code LOCKED15 to get 15% off your entire order and your next order after that and your next order after that, because there will be more at Built.com. By the way, if you could do me a favor and go to LockedOnPodcast.com/survey. LockedOnPodcast.com/survey. I'd love it because you guys have basically built a network, and we are looking to learn more from from all of our listeners. And this is your opportunity to tell us what you like and don't like about Locked On Podcasts. So go to LockedOnPodcast.com/survey right now to get started. It won't take very long. Everyone that completes the survey can qualify for a chance to win one of 10 $100 Ticketmaster gift cards. To take our audience survey, go to LockedOnPodcast.com/survey. Thanks for your help. All right, here's what Bet Online has for the coaches. The lead 4 candidates for the Bet Online coaches are Johnny Bryan at plus 300, Terry Stotts at plus 350, Frank Vogel at plus 700, and Alex Jensen at plus 700. Now, the list continues past that. Let's talk about these guys for a second. So Johnny, we all know well. I've had a lot of great times with Johnny. He and his wife, Vanessa, just absolutely fantastic people. And Johnny's been in New York as an associate head coach. He has no head coaching experience. He's obviously very connected to the franchise. He developed himself into a coach. He's just, I actually spoke at one of Johnny's college classes at the U. Like, that's how long I've known Johnny. So he's plus 300. Terry Stotts is really interesting to me. He's a veteran. He was one of the best offensive coaches in the NBA. He was criticized for Portland's defense, and then he left, and their defense was just as bad. So it makes you kind of wonder, like, well, then what are we criticizing him for? He ran a very creative offense. He was a third-time head coach. By the time he got to Portland, he was in Atlanta for 2 years and did not have success. He was in Milwaukee for 2 years and got fired midway through his second year. And then he went and spent 9 years in Portland. He was around the franchise recently when he was visiting with Quin Snyder. They won 50 games on four different occasions. They got to a conference finals. He's a very young, 64 years old. He's a mellow, calm guy. It's an interesting contrast to Quin, in the sense that he's got the intensity and everything, but he's just a little mellower and calmer, but he's also, at the same time, there's Alex Jensen's at plus 700. AJ has the background, obviously been with the franchise forever. He is one of the great coaches of all time in Rick Majerus. He is also, he also was a Canton Charge head coach, so he has that head coaching experience in Illinois. Some other names that Bet Online had was Mike D'Antoni at plus 700, Charles Lee, and Charles Lee is the assistant in Milwaukee at plus 800. And I'm not sure, maybe Charles Lee is just going to interview great. I don't know the background on Charles Lee and what would make him, he grew up in Washington. He's young. He's 37 years old. He went to Bucknell, which is interesting because one of the Jazz have a star on their bench, Brian Bailey, who went to Bucknell. And Bucknell's a small liberal arts college in Pennsylvania near the Amish, which means, this was not a highly regarded kid. He was able to kind of work his way through and played 4 years of this, goes undrafted and makes himself a playing career overseas, and then comes back as an assistant at Bucknell. And he spends 5 years in Atlanta, where he's with a lot of the current Jazz guys were in Atlanta in a lot of that time period. Vince LaGarza, Lamar Skeeter, Jeff Watkinson were all there. And then he goes to Milwaukee 2018 on. So he's got the experience of being with Bud. He's not like on the per se pop tree, but he's kind of got the Bud tree going there. Then Bet Online has some other interesting names. Adrian Griffin, former player, has been assistant all over the place. They had Dell Demps in there, which is not likely. Will Hardy's an interesting name. He's plus 900 on their list. And here's what's interesting about Will Hardy. One, he's out of the Spurs tree, which does seem to be, something that has led to a lot of coaches' success. If you look at, the best coaches in the league right now, Taylor Jenkins and Mike Budenholzer and Quin Snyder, they're all off the pop tree. Will Hardy's interesting because he left the pop tree and is currently in Boston, which means he's working directly with Austin Ainge. Now, if Austin Ainge suddenly turns around and says to Danny Ainge, this guy's amazing, well, then maybe Will Hardy somehow has a chance. Now, I've dealt with Will Hardy a bunch because he's been the Spurs assistant, was the Spurs coach in Summer League. He went to a small liberal arts college in Massachusetts called Williams College, which happens to be, if you ever see me wear a hat with a cow on it, that's a Williams College, because it's where my son goes right now. So he was and they went straight to the video room in San Antonio, and then worked his way up, an assistant coach on the bench for 4 years. With Pop, his relationship with Ime Udoka is back to the 2019 FIBA World Cup, where they were both on the coaching staff together. And then when Udoka took the job in Boston, he brought Will Hardy with him. So that's an interesting, it's a different path, non-player be, I wonder if, I don't know that that's I don't know if the Jazz want to go player or not, but that's a name out there. Jerome Allen is interesting. I think that's another one where when you go back to what Danny Ainge answered the question, he had these connections to people. Jerome Allen was a guy who kind of is another pretty intellectual guy. He played at Penn, bounced around the league for just a short period of time, and then was coaching, I believe, in Boston most recently as a coach. And so here's a guy that then touches a little bit of that same concept of somebody Danny might know, have a previous feeling about. He started his coaching career at Penn as an assistant in 2009 after finishing his playing career, and then actually became their interim head coach for a little while and became their permanent head coach for 5 years. I kind of love that. Like, I like these guys that have had head coaching at some place along the way. That's always been something for me. Allen, so after leaving Penn, he then goes and coaches with Boston starting in 2015. So he was there with Danny for a long time after being 6 years at Penn. I think that's an interesting name that's not getting a lot of play, but has a head coaching experience, has been around it before, has the tie to Danny. Both those last two names, I think, probably are going to get kind of some real interest maybe this. Now, Jerome Allen, I think, had some issues with at Penn, and so that could be prohibitive. But frankly, Quin Snyder had some issues along the way, and so there was a payment and Medicare and some other things that's probably worth knowing better than I know it right now, to keep an eye on that. So those are kind of the names. The final one is Kevin Young, who is interesting because he's got Utah Flash ties and was a head coach in the G League. He's in according to Bet Online. I think David Fizdale's name is another one that probably could get mentioned out here as well. But Kevin Young, by the way, is he was actually born in Salt Lake City. So he actually has a whole Utah tie to him. He was an assistant at Utah Valley State College to start out his career, and then becomes the Utah Flash assistant, the Utah Flash head coach. He then becomes an Iowa Energy head coach, a Delaware's 87ers head coach. He's then an assistant in Philly from 2017 to 2020. He is, I believe, a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So that's an interesting little aspect on Kevin Young as well. So there you go. There are the candidates according to Bet Online. Maybe the last three are the ones that we should be talking about. Kevin Young, Will Hardy, and Jerome Allen. I got a lot of faith in Danny. He's done it twice. We'll see what he does on this one. It is Locked On Jazz. Thanks very much for tuning in, being a part of the program. Be back with you tomorrow. We're here for you every day. Make your second listen Locked On NBA Big Board and get ready for the draft. Have a good one.